So many people get hung up on the exposure triangle, especially beginner photographers and videographers, and it seems daunting at the time to work out all these buttons and dials and what they all mean. But really, it's incredibly simple. And I bet you that if you spent 10 minutes a day for a week in manual mode on your camera, going out taking photos, you would have manual exposure nailed. So all we're trying to do with exposure on a camera is trying to get a picture where it isn't like super bright and everything's blown out and you can't really see some things, or where it's super dark and the shadows are really deep and again you can't see many things. So you're just trying to get the picture to a point where you can sort of balance that, and it's never going to be perfect, but you can balance what we call the highlights, the bright stuff, and the shadows, the dark stuff, and get a kind of nice in-between picture where you can see as much as you possibly can of the detail in the dark stuff and the really bright stuff. So exposure on cameras consists of three things. You have shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So starting with shutter speed, because that's probably the easiest to understand, I would say, and it is literally just, if you imagine your camera, okay, grabbing an image like this with a fast shutter speed, bang! It's grabbed that moment in time, super quick, okay? But because that's so fast, it's only had a very short amount of time to grab the light that's available, the light that's available in front of the camera, okay? The sensor needs to grab that light, and it's done it really quickly, so it hasn't grabbed much light. On a bright sunny day, that's fine, because you've got loads of light. It's only grabbed it for a short amount of time, but it's grabbed enough light because there's so much light out there, okay? If you're in a slightly darker room and it's done that, it's only grabbed a tiny bit of a tiny bit of light. So that's when you need to increase your time that the shutter's open for, okay? So the shutter's open for much longer. So instead of going, grab it, it's going, grab that image. So it's had much more time, there's less light out there, but it's been able to gather it up because it's been open for much longer, and then the image ends. Now the next one to understand is aperture. And basically within your lens on your camera, there are a load of blades which kind of close in like that, and then open up like that, okay? And you can imagine when they're open like that, we call it wide open, what's happening? It's letting in more light. When they're closed right down, what's happening? It's letting in less light. Okay, more light, less light. It's as simple as that. Now, as you play around with this more light, less light thing, you're going to notice that it doesn't just have an effect of more light, less light, it also has an effect on the depth of field. So that kind of blurry background that you get, or where everything's in focus, you can see everything. But that's a kind of aside to what we're trying to explain about the exposure triangle and just getting the correct light into your camera. And the third and final factor of exposure in your camera is ISO. Now, again, this is a very complex, in-depth mathematical thing, but the science of it just does not matter for simply getting the right light into your picture. All you really need to know is that ISO 100 is the least amount of light, and then cameras go up to ISO, I don't know, 25,000, 50,000, whatever, and that is getting the most amount of light. It depends on the camera, but usually the lower ISO levels, like 100, 200, are the cleanest image, and as you go up the ISO levels, your image starts to get noise in it, which just basically means it looks a little bit kind of grainy. So that is the exposure triangle in a nutshell, and how to dial in your camera to get the right amount of light for the environment that you're in and the picture that you're trying to achieve. Each one of those elements has a kind of a consequence of going one way or the other on the range that you've got there. So it's kind of about trying to balance what you're trying to achieve with your picture and the amount of available light and the capabilities of your camera. That's where it gets complicated, but that's where it's only experience that's going to allow you to make those decisions quickly and dial it in your camera. The primary thing is just getting out of auto mode, sticking it in manual, and just getting the right amount of light into your picture by tweaking these 3 elements. That's the initial thing to get you out of auto mode and into manual mode.